Look at your hand right now. Actually do it. Go on and really look at it. The skin covering it, the color of it. That particular shade you've carried your entire life, one you never selected, never applied for, never earned or deserved. It's simply there. It's simply you. Now here's a question that sounds straightforward, but will completely shatter your brain if you sit with it long enough. Why does it have that color? Not philosophically, literally, biologically, evolutionarily. Why does your skin appear the way it does? Why do people born in different corners of the world carry such dramatically different skin tones? And most critically, why did some of our ancestors transition from very dark skin to the kind of pale that has people comparing themselves to printer paper? The answer involves sunlight, a vitamin most people only remember when their doctor passive aggressively flags it on blood work results, a diet heavy in fish, and one of the most humbling discoveries in all of human biology. Let's go back to the very beginning. Roughly 300,000 years ago, the first anatomically modern Homo sapiens appeared on this planet. They emerged in Africa, and every last one of them, without a single exception, had dark skin. This isn't a theory. This isn't open for debate. Genetic analysis, anthropological evidence, and comparative biology all arrive at the same conclusion. The original state of human skin is deeply pigmented, dark brown, sometimes looking almost black depending on the light, and the reason for it is both elegant and slightly terrifying. The African sun is trying to kill you, not dramatically, not in a teeth and claws kind of way, in a quiet, invisible, ultraviolet radiation kind of way. The equatorial sun hammers down relentlessly, vertically 365 days a year. Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't experience seasons the way Finland does. There is no winter reprieve from UV radiation. Just the sun, every single day, absolutely refusing to take a day off. And one of the things UV radiation dismantles quietly, invisibly, and with remarkable efficiency is folate. Folate, vitamin B9. You've probably seen it printed on a cereal box and immediately looked away. But folate is among the most critical molecules in your entire body. It's essential for DNA synthesis. It's vital for cell division. It plays a central role in red blood cell production. And during pregnancy, it is completely non-negotiable. If a pregnant woman's folate drops too low, the risk of neural tube defects, conditions like spina bifida, where the spinal column fails to close correctly, spikes dramatically. We're talking about birth defects severe enough to be fatal or cause permanent disability. Miscarriages. Developmental complications in the fetus. In other words, if UV radiation is stripping your folate and you are pregnant, hoping to become pregnant, or planning to reproduce at all, you have a serious problem. Evolution, as always, wasn't going to tolerate that. Enter melanin. Melanin is the pigment produced by specialized cells called melanocytes, and it does something remarkable. It absorbs and scatters UV radiation before it can penetrate deeply into the skin and devastate your folate levels. Think of it as a built-in biological sun filter. The more melanin you carry, the darker your skin and the stronger your protection. In high UV environments, having abundant melanin isn't just aesthetically striking, it's a direct survival advantage. People with more melanin preserved their folate. They had healthier pregnancies. Their children lived. They passed those genes forward. And across tens of thousands of generations, dark skin became embedded in the human genome across equatorial populations. It's a gorgeous system. Clean, efficient, effective. The problem is what unfolded next. Somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 years ago, depending on which genetic model you prefer, and researchers genuinely love debating this at conferences, a group of Homo sapiens departed Africa. We don't know precisely why. The leading theories point to climate shifts, changing resource availability, population pressure, or simply the fundamental human impulse to stare at a horizon and wonder what's beyond it. Whatever pushed them, they left, and they began spreading across the globe in what we now call the out of Africa migration, One of the most consequential journeys in history, except with no roads, no vehicles, and absolutely no GPS. They moved into the Middle East, into South Asia, into East Asia, into Europe. And as they pushed further from the equator, something fundamental about their world changed. The sun grew weaker. Not literally. The sun didn't shrink. But at higher latitudes, the angle at which sunlight contacts Earth's surface becomes considerably shallower. UV radiation has to cut through more atmosphere before reaching the ground, and much of it gets absorbed or scattered along the way. In northern Europe, the sun barely lifts above the horizon during winter months. Entire weeks can pass with meaningful UV exposure near zero. For dark-skinned people who had just walked out of equatorial Africa and begun settling in Scandinavia or the British Isles, this was, biologically speaking, a slow-motion catastrophe. Because here's the other side of the UV equation. You need some UV radiation. Your body depends on it. Specifically, your skin uses UVB radiation to manufacture vitamin D. When UVB photons strike a compound in your skin called 7-dehydrocholesterol, a chemical reaction converts it into vitamin D3, which your liver and kidneys then process into active vitamin D. And vitamin D, it turns out, is not a luxury. It is not a wellness supplement for people who enjoy overpaying at health food stores. Vitamin D governs calcium and phosphate absorption in your intestines, which is how your bones and teeth get mineralized. Without it, calcium from your food moves through you without being properly absorbed. Your immune system draws on vitamin D receptors found in nearly every immune cell type. It factors into muscle function. It's involved in regulating inflammation. Evidence suggests it influences brain development and mood. And the condition caused by severe vitamin D deficiency in children is rickets. Rickets is not subtle. When children lack sufficient vitamin D, their bones simply cannot calcify properly. They stay soft and pliable. Then the weight of the child's own body begins warping them. Bowed legs, curved spines, deformed rib cages that make breathing labored, skull malformations. These children suffered compromised immune systems, chronic pain, and dramatically reduced odds of surviving into adulthood, let alone flourishing. In adults, the equivalent condition is osteomalacia. Softened, aching bones that fracture with ease and never quite heal correctly. In an equatorial environment drenched with UV radiation, this was never an issue. But in northern latitudes, with scarce UV availability and very dark skin, specifically engineered to block as much UV as possible, you've got a profound biological mismatch. The very armor that shielded your ancestors in Africa was now blocking the thing keeping your bones solid. Individuals born with slightly less melanin, due to random genetic mutations, could synthesize more vitamin D in low UV environments. Their bones were stronger, their immune systems more capable, their children healthier and more likely to survive. Over thousands of generations, those mutations rippled through northern populations. The most significant of them occurred in a gene called SLC24A5. A single nucleotide change, one letter different in a 3 billion letter genetic code. In this gene accounts for between 25 and 38% of the skin tone difference between European and African populations today. One mutation. That's the punchline. After hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, crafting dark skin for African conditions, one tiny change in one gene explains a massive portion of why Northern Europeans appear the way they do. Another significant mutation in a gene called SLC45A2 contributed meaningfully to the process as well. These mutations are thought to have moved through European populations with remarkable speed, evolutionarily speaking. Evidence suggests the major lightening of European skin occurred largely within the last 8,000 to 10,000 years. Which brings us to the part of this story that genuinely broke the internet. When ancient DNA technology grew sophisticated enough to analyze the genes of prehistoric Europeans, researchers made a discovery that a surprising number of people found deeply unsettling. Early European hunter-gatherers, people who had lived in Europe for thousands of years, were dark-skinned, not slightly olive, not medium brown, significantly dark-skinned, with features that would today be associated with populations nowhere near Northern Europe. The most well-known example is Cheddar Man, recovered from Ghost Cave in Somerset, England, dating back approximately 10,000 years. He is among the oldest complete human skeletons ever discovered in Britain. Scientists pulled ancient DNA from his inner ear bone, analyzed the pigmentation genes, and confirmed Cheddar Man had dark to dark brown skin, blue or green eyes, and dark curly hair. He was British in every meaningful sense. He lived in Britain. He died in Britain. He has documented living descendants in the surrounding area today, and he looked nothing like what most people had pictured when they imagined ancient Britons. The BBC covered this story in 2018, and the reaction from certain parts of the internet was what scientists might diplomatically describe as highly agitated. Some people flatly refused to accept it. The science, however, has been replicated and confirmed repeatedly across multiple ancient individuals from multiple European sites. Early Europe was not a continent of pale, skinned people. It became one, and rather recently. The acceleration of that lightning process appears tightly linked to the spread of agriculture. Around 7,000 to 9,000 years ago, farming communities from Anatolia, present-day Turkey, began migrating into Europe. They carried with them wheat, barley, domesticated animals, and an entirely different way of organizing life. They mixed with, and in many places largely displaced, the existing hunter-gatherer populations. Their genes, including genes associated with lighter skin, began spreading across European communities. But here's the irony that makes evolutionary biologists chuckle grimly at conferences. Farming may have actually made vitamin D deficiency considerably worse before genetics had time to catch up. Think about it. Hunter-gatherers spent their entire lives outdoors, moving continuously, exposed to whatever sunlight was available. And critically, their diet was packed with wild game, fish, shellfish, and organ meats, all meaningful sources of dietary vitamin D. Early farmers. They settled permanently in one place. They began wearing more clothing for practical and social reasons. They started spending more time inside structures processing grain, and their diet shifted overwhelmingly towards cereals, wheat, barley, millet, which contain essentially zero vitamin D. So now you have people living at northern latitudes with dark skin calibrated for African UV levels, eating a diet stripped of dietary vitamin D, spending less time outside, under skies that deliver minimal UV radiation for large parts of the year. That is a blueprint for absolute skeletal devastation. The selection pressure for lighter skin in these early European agricultural populations was likely intense. Not gradual and gentle, but rapid and unrelenting. Every generation, children with lighter skin who could produce more vitamin D were measurably healthier than their darker-skinned peers. Across a few thousand years, that difference in survival and reproduction compounds into a population-wide transformation. But wait, because this story has one final twist, and it's a good one. If insufficient UV exposure was the primary selective force pushing skin to lighten, you'd expect the palest people on Earth to be those living in environments with the absolute least sunlight. The Arctic, northern Canada, Alaska, Siberia. And yet the indigenous peoples of those regions, the Inuit, the Yupik, the Aleut, various Siberian groups, carry skin considerably darker than Northern Europeans living at roughly comparable or even lower latitudes. How? How did people inhabiting some of the darkest, coldest, most UV-starved environments on Earth maintain relatively dark skin without suffering catastrophic vitamin D deficiency? Fish, specifically fatty, oily, cold water fish, and marine mammals, and seal blubber. The traditional diet of Arctic indigenous peoples is extraordinarily concentrated in exactly the foods that rank among the highest known dietary sources of vitamin D. Wild salmon, herring mackerel, Arctic char, seal liver, whale blubber. A single traditional Arctic meal can supply several days' worth of vitamin D requirements. When your diet is delivering all the vitamin D your body needs, your skin has no reason to produce it from sunlight. There's no deficiency for natural selection to push against. The pressure toward lighter skin simply never materialized. Same evolutionary problem, low UV environment with risk of vitamin D deficiency, solved through an entirely different mechanism. Europeans solved it genetically by reducing their melanin. Arctic peoples solved it dietetically by eating an ocean's worth of oily fish. Same destination, completely different path. Evolution doesn't care which solution works as long as you live long enough to reproduce. There's one more layer worth mentioning, even if it's murkier and more actively debated. Some researchers have proposed that sexual selection, essentially mate preference, may have also contributed to driving skin color differences in certain populations across certain historical periods. The idea is that in some cultural settings, particular skin tones may have functioned as signals of health, youth, or social standing in ways that shaped who reproduced with whom. This is genuinely difficult to study because you'd need to untangle cultural preference from biological selection pressure, and cultures don't leave fossils. The evolutionary biology community debates it actively, and the honest answer is we don't fully know. What we do know is that human evolution is never a clean, single-variable story. It's always survival pressure layered with sexual selection, layered with genetic drift, layered with population mixing, layered with a dozen other forces, all interacting simultaneously in ways that require geneticists to consume several cups of coffee before they can explain it coherently. And now we arrive at the part that actually matters most. Step back and consider what we've just walked through. Skin color, the characteristic that has been weaponized throughout human history to divide people, to classify and rank them, to justify systems of exploitation and oppression, to determine who receives opportunities and who doesn't, who gets presumed innocent, and who doesn't, who gets to simply exist in peace and who doesn't, is among the most superficial differences imaginable between human populations. We're talking about a handful of mutations, genes that govern the quantity of melanin in the outermost layer of your skin, changes that unfolded largely within the last 10,000 years, which, against the backdrop of a species that has existed for 300,000 years and a lineage stretching back millions more, is genuinely nothing. Geneticists who study human variation have consistently arrived at the same finding. There is more genetic variation within any so-called racial group than between them. Two dark-skinned people from different parts of Africa can be more genetically distinct from each other than either is from a fair-skinned person in Northern Europe. The populations we've clustered into races are not coherent biological categories. They are folk taxonomies constructed on top of a small number of visible surface characteristics. The science on this is not subtle. It is not ambiguous. The variation in human appearance across the globe is real, obviously, but it rests on a foundation of overwhelming shared biology. We are one species. We evolved together. We diverged relatively recently, in geographic isolation, adapting to local conditions in ways that shifted a handful of genes while leaving the vast majority of our genome essentially unchanged. Everything constructed on top of that, every hierarchy, every system, every ideology that assigned worth or capacity or humanity on the basis of skin tone was erected on a fundamental misreading of what skin color actually is. Skin color is geography. It's latitude, it's UV index, it's ancestral diet. It is not character. It is not intelligence. It is not worth. So the next time you look at your hand or anyone else's, here's what you're genuinely looking at. A postcard from the past. A biological record of where your ancestors lived, how much sun reached them, what they ate, what the sky above them looked like through the seasons. If your lineage spent hundreds of thousands of years near the equator, you received melanin. Extraordinary, elegant, UV, absorbing melanin that kept your ancestors healthy and fertile in conditions that would have ravaged paler skin. If your lineage spent thousands of years in the gray winters of northern Europe, subsisting on grain and far too little fish, your melanin pulled back so your skin could catch whatever weak winter light was available and convert it into the vitamin D your bones desperately needed. If your lineage lived in the Arctic and ate fresh salmon nearly every day, your body concluded we're fine, keep the pigmentation, and simply moved on. None of these people planned any of this. None of them chose it. An ancient human who walked out of Africa 70,000 years ago, squinting into an unfamiliar horizon, stepping into a wind they had never felt, was not calculating melanin genes or UV indices or vitamin D synthesis pathways. They were simply walking north because something, hunger, curiosity, necessity, sheer stubbornness, pressed them forward. And over thousands of years, the world quietly, invisibly, letter by letter through their genetic code, reshaped their descendants. The sun sculpted them. The winters diluted their pigmentation. The fish sustained them. Evolution, patient and indifferent and endlessly inventive, found its solutions. And then, much later, those descendants looked at one another across the full spectrum of skin tones that geography had produced, and some of them decided those differences said something fundamental about who was more human. That conclusion was not inscribed in their genes. That conclusion was entirely their own. And unlike genes, conclusions can be revised.